Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 26th of January 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, is Mike Robinson. And we're joined today by David Scott, David with Northern Exposure. Where do we start, Mike? The news that we've compiled today is so extraordinary. I think some people are going to have difficulty believing it, but we'll see. BBC, I think, is the place to begin. And I was just fascinated to see this interview. A lady called Anna being interviewed by BBC Newsnight Emily Maitlis about her experiences at the scandal-hit President's Club Gala event in London. They say the club is closing, but the interview goes through what these nasty men did and what a terrible event it was, and really how women have been really badly treated. And Miss Maitlis there, I thought, looked particularly demure as she did this interview on these young ladies didn't know what they were getting into and those horrible society men. So I thought she was well dressed, and that's right up to the neck, Mike. So there's no doubt this is a demure BBC interviewer. Well, there was something at the back of my mind, and it was this. Piers Morgan, back in 2008, I think it was, he introduced his first awards ceremony. Obviously fairly keen on the women, and I did notice the lady who's leaning on his left shoulder. That's the face just to the right.
Yes.
So if you're interested in what sort of ladies attended and how this worked, well, of course, they were there for a professional discussion. And here she is herself, and she was given an award. Interesting dress, and this is part of her on the internet. I just want to say sheer and utter hypocrisy by the BBC is what I'd like to say over that. And I'm not surprised she's called Maitlis at all. Meanwhile, you've got, I think, politicians in with a much safer jet set, Mike.
Well, indeed, because this is Penny Mordaunt, who, of course, is our International Development Secretary, and she is at the University of Edinburgh today with Bill Gates, no less. So this is the pair of them showcasing how communities worldwide are being helped by innovative agricultural research. So Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UK International Development Secretary are going to co-chair this event. They're going to discuss how their organisations invest in projects based in Edinburgh, which are improving the health and productivity of people and farm animals at home and abroad. Now, maybe this is a good time to welcome David Scott to the programme. David, this is clearly one of a continuing, another attempt by Penny Mordaunt to sort of rebrand UK aid, because, of course, they've been criticised in recent months, not least by us, for funding terrorism and other dodgy dealings in various parts of the world, and we've simply made the observation that everywhere UK aid money goes, terrorism seems to follow. But Penny Mordaunt, only recently in the job, attempting to sort of rebrand UK aid as being there purely for dealing with global poverty and particularly feeding people. So, David, you must be pretty pleased that this is going on in Edinburgh University.
It's very interesting that's going on in Edinburgh University, because Edinburgh University, of all the Scottish universities, is the go-to institution when the establishment, when the powers that be, seek an intellectual bodyguard, seek justification for their actions. It's always Edinburgh.
Okay. Well, let's move on to this then, because you wanted to highlight this article in The Guardian. The headline is "Police Investigate Swastika Graffiti on Conservative Offices in Aberdeen." And alongside that, well, that's one end of the country. At the other end of the country, in Devon, no less, apparently left-wing protesters left a coffin outside the Tory MP's office in what the Sun is describing as a vile threat. Are we seeing more of this type of... is this genuine, or is this just similar to what was going on with Cathy Newman, an attempt by people that are doing the wrong things to persuade us that really they're being hard done by as a result of the reaction to what they're doing?
No, I don't think it is. I think it is genuine. I think it speaks to something that's deeper. The attack on the office in Aberdeen, that's now twice that's happened, and the use of Tory as an insult in Scotland. I was sent some examples of a Facebook discussion on a nationalist, closed but very very popular Facebook site for discussion of Scottish nationalism, and someone asked what should be done with the 13 Tory MPs who keep voting in the way they keep voting in Westminster, and the response was hang them as traitors, capital punishment, put them out of the country, they should be hanged and gutted, torched, shot. This is the level. This is in a public forum. It's a popular private forum, closed your members forum on Facebook. This is the level of discussion. Now this comes from somewhere, and the anger and the graffiti and all the rest of it comes from somewhere, because the nature of the left these days has changed. It's a postmodern left. There is no right or wrong. There's nothing you can believe in. It's only power. And what you have to do is you have to silence the opposition. You have to browbeat them, or you have to harm them. You have to make sure that there is no discussion, there is no public discourse, and that the only thing that makes right is might. That's what we're seeing, I think.
Sorry, Mike. David, if I just come in on that, if people read Julia Middleton's book, obviously Julia Middleton, the chief executive, Common Purpose, and her book Beyond Authority, in one of the chapters, this effectively is the language they're using, because they're talking about running over opposition, bullying, really language which you're utterly surprised at when you come in the book, but because this is saying not have a reasonable discussion with people who don't like what Common Purpose is doing, but you've got to bulldoze your way over them, or you've got to use some devious tactic to get them out the way, or use them as a useful idiot. This is the language being pushed forward by all of these, I'm going to deliberately call them change agents.
Yes, and you have then people are vilified. People are told that their views are disgusting. They're not. You don't disagree with someone. No, they are disgusting for holding these views. They are made so that they are socially outcast for having an idea, for wanting to discuss an idea. And then if they don't go away, they're no platformed and physically barred. This is the way the debate is being conducted in Britain today.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to Davos. Of course, George Soros not speaking at the actual event, but was speaking at a Bloomberg event on the sidelines. Let's listen to the first couple of minutes of what he had to say.
Thank you all for listening to me. It has become something of an annual Davos tradition for me to give an overview of the current state of the world. I was planning half an hour for my remarks and another half hour for questions, but my speech has turned out to be closer to an hour. I attribute it to the severity of the problems confronting us today. After I finished, I'll open it up for your questions, so please be prepared. I find the current moment in history rather painful. Open societies are in crisis, and various forms of dictatorships and mafia states, exemplified by Putin's Russia, are on the rise. In the United States, President Trump would like to establish a mafia state, but can't, because the Constitution, the institutions, and a vibrant civil society won't allow it. Whether we like it or not, my foundations, most of our grantees, and myself personally are fighting an uphill battle, protecting the democratic achievements of the past. my foundations used to focus on the so-called developing world. But now that the open society is also endangered in the United States and Europe, we are spending more than half our budget closer to home, because what is happening here is having a negative impact on the whole world.
So a negative impact on the whole world. Brian, he went on to say that the situation has deteriorated, not only the survival of open society, but the survival of our entire civilization is at stake. He said both Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump seem to be willing to risk nuclear war in order to keep themselves in power. He said that the United States is set on a course towards nuclear war by refusing to accept that North Korea has become a nuclear power. So, but the first couple of lines where he immediately gets in this suggestion that Russia is a mafia state, that Russia is is indicative of something which is spreading across the world. He wasn't pulling any punches, and we're going to say it's going to be a theme through the program. The rise in the rhetoric against Russia is just getting laughable.
Well, this whole speech, Mike, is absolutely incredible. People need to listen to this man. Who is he? He's an extremely wealthy man. That is his flag. He's a multi-billionaire, maybe a trillionaire, nobody knows. He can spend billions, because he does, in changing the way our society is. When he talks about open society as if it's a positive thing, I think he's talking about his plan for society, and he is desperately worried because people are waking up to his plan, and of course the Russians are saying we don't even want you in the country. That's why he's attacking Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, David, there was one section of his speech which I'm disappointed to say I found myself agreeing with. He said that Facebook and Google effectively control over half of all internet advertising revenue. He said they claim that they are merely distributors of information. The fact that they are near monopoly distributors makes them public utilities and should subject them to more stringent regulations aimed at preserving competition, innovation, and fair and open universal access. He said that they would compromise themselves by getting in bed with China. And he said this may well result in a web of totalitarian control, the likes of which not even Aldous Huxley or George Orwell could have imagined. This is quite incredible. We seem to have somebody who's sort of driving the globalist agenda now decrying one of the major effects of the globalist agenda because it hasn't worked out for them.
No, appearing to decry it. Regulation, he said we must regulate the internet to save it from the
itself.
Chinese.
Yeah.
Pick your bogeyman. Now, I would point out that regulating the banks has not liberated us from financial theft. Regulating the internet would not protect our liberty. It would be the stealthy way of removing it. Now, if somebody like Google or Facebook, for all their market domination at the moment, really annoys the internet community by going wholeheartedly pro-Red China and being anti-free speech, they will be history. They will be replaced. There have been many leaders in these fields before who have gone by the wayside, and the same can and I think will happen to Facebook and people like Twitter because of their anti-liberty tendencies and politically led tendencies. But regulation, I'm afraid, Mike, is not the answer.
Well, that
Mr. Soros' answer.
Yeah, well, that might be the case, David. I mean, I think I can't be quite as optimistic about what is going to happen to these organizations as you're suggesting there, because when they have a monopoly of the scale that they have, and actually there's nothing else out there to offer any alternative, it becomes very difficult for people to make that decision make that change for themselves.
Yeah, but it's not impossible, and it can happen as a tipping point. The abuses will get worse and worse and worse, and still these organisations will be dominant, and then all of a sudden, and they won't be. There'll be some Ratner moment, and they'll be gone. It can happen in a heartbeat.
Okay, well, we look forward to that day. Now, we mentioned Theresa May's speech yesterday. Now, of course, it was taking place while we were doing the news yesterday, so we couldn't show you that live. There wasn't very much in it, frankly, other than what we talked about yesterday, because she also was getting involved in the comments about Facebook and Twitter and so on. But there were a couple of examples of some strange use of language, and one of which I want to highlight here. This is just one example of it, so let's watch this.
Listen carefully.
We do need to listen carefully.
Already, access to the internet has been estimated to have the potential to generate over $2.2 trillion in additional GDP and more than 140 million new jobs in developing countries alone. While nearly 35% of the adult population in sub-Saharan Africa has a mobile money account, the highest percentage in the world. And now the impact of technology is growing in ways that even a few years ago we could not have imagined.
Now, that may have passed, because it went by quite quickly. So let's just put this up on screen to highlight the particular sentence I was interested in. She said, while nearly 35% of the adult population in sub-Saharan Africa has a mobile phone account, the highest percentage in the world. Now, that's not a sentence, Brian, because when you begin a sentence with while, you normally expect something to follow on. So that's only half a sentence. And it took me quite some time to work out what was actually going on there, because what she actually had intended to say was that already access to the internet has been estimated to have the potential to generate over $2.2 trillion in additional GDP and more than 140 million new jobs in developing countries alone, while nearly 35% of the adult population and so on, right? So those two sentences were supposed to go together. But as she spoke, as we were listening to what she was saying, she separated those sentences with such a pause that she separated them into two things. That should have been a comma, not a full stop between those two sentences. So, Brian, it seems to me that she didn't know what she was talking about.
Yeah, but she's reading from a script. This is not something that's in her mind. She's researched it, worked on it, believes in it. She's simply delivering a script, and that can be very difficult to do in public. So she's not read the script accurately, so the meanings become disjointed. But what it does is gives you a glimpse inside Theresa May's head, and there's not a lot there. She is simply reading what other people have given her. That's my analysis. I don't know, David, whether you would come in at a different angle.
No, I thought that as well. It was disjointed because she wasn't really understanding what the message was. And that's quite annoying, because what she's actually talking about there is an example of where we need to go. The reason that mobile money is taken off in Africa is, for the first time, you can be trading in Africa and be sure you won't be ripped off. No one will steal your stuff, and you won't get past any funny money, because it's been done electronically to a secure account. So it means that transactions are safe and trustworthy, and that's a basic building block of a capitalist society that allows people to start to thrive and serve one another. And this has been hugely transformative in Africa, and that's what she should be talking about, but she's very unimpressive.
Well, at least she wasn't wearing plunging neckline and very short skirt, Mike, with those nasty international men. So I think she was wearing trousers, actually.
Oh, she was, absolutely, absolutely. The other thing that she did mention in her speech that we didn't cover yesterday was that she's announced that they are establishing an Institute of Coding, a consortium of more than 60 universities, businesses and industry experts, plus government, to support training and retraining in digital skills. So this is the next generation of digital specialists, who will be created through the new Institute of Coding. It's going to get £20 million from the government to bridge the digital skills gap. And as I say, formed of businesses including IBM, Cisco, BT, Microsoft, small and medium-sized enterprises, 25 universities, professional bodies such as the British Computer Society and CREST, and the government. So what are we saying here is it this? What are we creating in front of our eyes with this? Every area of public life that we look at the moment, we're seeing this this collaboration, this bringing corporate interests in. Surely this is something for the private sector to do.
Well, it should be, but this is how you bring in a 1984 style government, the like of which nobody has ever seen before. Everything is to be integrated, data-based, cross-linked, so that a few people can control everything. They can control what would technically be civil service or the public sector and private. It all becomes one.
David?
Now, coding is very much at the cutting edge of technology these days. And you don't study it at the university because the things that the universities are teaching are so far out of date because the technology is moving so fast. Even if it's only a few years out of date, by the time you come out of university, you have a lot of completely unusable skills because the industry's moved away. It's dynamic, it's fast moving, it's innovative. Now, when you take something like that and you institutionalize it, which seems to be the proposal here, you kill it.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's move on to back to Russia. Well, Jens Stoltenberg really talking about this yesterday. He said that NATO takes Russia very seriously and any Russian attempts to interfere in foreign elections, including during Spain's Catalonia crisis, they keep banging on the same rhetoric. They don't have anything actually new to say. But he said, we have seen that there's been significant increase in different attempts to try to interfere by different means in domestic political crises. We discussed and addressed in our meeting the reports that we have seen about attempts by Russia to interfere in several countries. Any interference from outside, of course, is unacceptable, and we take this very seriously. So this rhetoric continuing to build, we'll just, with a wry smile on our face, make the point that the doomsday clock has now moved half a minute forwards, and we're now 2 minutes to midnight because of all this rhetoric. But Brian, we have a message for people.
We do, and David, I did ask you just before the programme started, you had some difficulty with it. We're now able to put this on. This is very serious. Run, hide, tell. The Russians are coming.
Okay.
So that is the advice now from security services in Britain. Of course, if there's an emergency, a terrorist incident, that must include the Russians. We've got to run, hide and tell. And all we are hearing is that the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. There's no evidence that the Russians are coming, but the Russians are coming, Mike. So let's see what the Telegraph says. Well, they say run, hide, tell. Those nasty Russians are coming. Russia ready to kill thousands and thousands with crippling attack on British infrastructure, Defence Secretary says. Now, I would have expected the Plymouth dockyard siren to have been sounded to alert us in Plymouth to the fact the Russians are coming, and I would have thought Dad's army would have been called up by now, Mike.
Yeah, indeed.
This is unbelievable propaganda coming out, and who better to push it than the BBC? So here we are, Defence Secretary warns of Russia plot against infrastructure. I've called this a fake news extravaganza because it's simply government propaganda being pushed out by the BBC. And I say no wonder that 83% of Britons don't trust the BBC. That's not a UK column statistic. That was a poll carried out and reported in the Daily Mail a little while ago. Well, what does the BBC defence reporter Jonathan Beale say? He says that some may see the Defence Secretary's language as alarmist. There's no problem here, but it may just be a little bit alarmist that we're being told the Russians are going to kill hundreds and hundreds of thousands of us.
But he's not saying it's alarmist. He's saying that some may view it that way.
Well, yeah, but there's nothing else he says. That's all he says, Mike.
Oh.
That's it. So there we are. He's looking into, I'm not sure what he's looking into. So let's have a look at what the Minister for Propaganda and War, Gavin Williamson, said. He said Russia could cause thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths by crippling UK infrastructure. Moscow was spying on energy supplies, which, if cut, could cause total chaos in the country. the real threat the country is facing at the moment. This is astonishing stuff, Mike.
I'm sorry, Brian, I'm having trouble keeping my face straight.
Absolutely. Now let's remember who was talking about who was going to cause total chaos in UK, and 2 Conservative MPs said in public that the Conservative Party was going to unleash chaos in Britain. That's what they said, reported in The Guardian and elsewhere. The Conservatives plan to introduce a period of creative destruction in the public service. So there we are. Well done, the Conservatives. Gavin Williams is a member of the Conservative Party, I think.
I believe so.
I believe so. Let's bring him back on screen. He says Russia had been researching these types of connections and would be willing to take action any other nation would see as completely unacceptable. The plan for the Russians won't be for landing craft to appear in the South Bay in Scarborough and off Brighton Beach. Is this man on drugs, Mike? I have to ask this on the UK Column News today. This is unbelievable stuff. It goes on. They're going to be thinking, how can we just cause so much pain to Britain, damage its economy, rip its infrastructure apart, actually cause thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths, but actually have an element of creating total chaos within the country. So that's why Gavin Williamson is cutting British defence.
Yes.
But not to worry, because in the BB's report, I will let you in here in a second, David, but enjoy this because it is so utterly mind-boggling. In the BBC report, they went to an expert, and that is former Admiral Alan West. He said he's absolutely certain Russia is looking at how to get into the UK's critical infrastructure, but I've added here that Alan West is also interested about getting back into other critical infrastructure and the party. And there he is in his pirate's outfit. This was a man, of course, who was talking about the military and British security at a time it was being cut while the Russians were rebuilding their own military. But he's just the man for the BBC to use. And then if you think we're touching on madness here, let's bring in the National Cyber Security Centre, because this gentleman, Mr. Martin, is quoted by the BBC. He said Russia has already staged attacks against Britain's media, telecommunications and energy sectors over the past year. So we called the National Cyber Security Centre earlier today to ask what evidence they've provided that Russia is attacking the UK by cyber attacks against those sectors. Their response from the media man was very aggressive and evasive. It was essentially go away. So let's have a look at how this follows through. Sorry for that additional piece of text. They said to me that we operate with companies and they report incidents to us. Last year, there were 1,131 cyber incidents reported, of which 590 were significant, of which 30 were Cat 2 and required cross-government intervention. Now, remember, my question is, where is the evidence against the Russians? So I said that's okay, but where is the evidence that Russia was involved? They replied, NCSC, our work is operational. We're part of GCHQ. We can't compromise that work. I said, I understand how security works, and I also know the material which does not compromise overall security can be released at a lower level. NCSC, well, look, we work with companies and they make the referrals to us. We can't name them as they wouldn't give us information. So this is all looking very murky, Mike. So I said, that's fine, but these are serious allegations that Russia is attacking the UK. And the response is, you're not listening to what I'm saying, and I will have to shut the call down. Got aggressive here, Mike.
Yeah, that's quite amazing.
And we'll end on this one. I said, okay, I'll do as you say, because of course this is the government telling me what I should think. I'm listening. Do you have evidence? And at that point, the call was terminated. So lastly on screen, what are the National Cyber Security Unit doing about the fact the Russians are coming? Well, I don't know what you think they might be doing, David, but if we blow this part of their Twitter page up, they are recruiting 12 and 13-year-old girls. So let's put it in thing, those nasty Russians are coming, And this £1 billion security operation is boasting that it's recruiting 12 and 13-year-old little girls to join its spying network. This is like Alice in Wonderland, except it's real, David.
I'm speechless for the first time on this programme. What? This is just bizarre. I mean, I take it the answer was, no, we haven't got any evidence against the Russians, because that's always the answer.
Oh, no,
David, and you know, the Russians, they had a Twitter account. That was it.
David, it's better than this, because they say, no, we have lots of evidence. It's true. You should believe us because we are linked to GCHQ and the government. It's true. I just asked for the evidence, and boy, did they get aggressive. That is always a sign, of course, they do not have the evidence. And when I suggested this was the same scam as was used on so-called chemical attacks in Syria, blamed on Assad with no evidence, you could feel the heat building. I've no doubt my phone is going to be tapped now, surely.
Well, quite possibly. Okay, let's move on. David, speaking of spies and spying, Dundee Police are now urging taxi drivers to spy. So how far does this go in Scotland?
This is wonderful on for a couple of reasons. One, because the police showed that they didn't have any idea what the law was, but the taxi driver did much better. The police said, the police also, all through this article are quoted, and they always speak in pidgin English, and the Taxi Drivers Association representative speaks in perfect English. It's just a nice little contrast. So the police wanted the cabbies to drop people off, and then if they're going to a party and they're young, they wanted the cabbies then to phone the police and tell them where the party was. They said that they know where the parties are, but more houses can be frequently used for parties, and they want the assistance of the public. The director of the Dundee taxis said it was not the role of drivers to monitor fares, and it was not part of the operating conditions of being an unlicensed driver either. We cannot guess what people are up to once they leave the taxi, and it is not our job to do so. Well said, Mr. Kasia Habib, who was the taxi driver there, and a great shame that Police Scotland didn't realise that asking people to spy and inform the police was not part of what they should be doing.
Yeah, but David, this is utterly outrageous that this should have happened north of the border, because what it means is if the young 12, 13-year-old girls who are working for the National Cybersecurity Centre are going to a party, somebody's spying on them. Well, we can't have people spying on the spies who are spying on us, can we?
Well, maybe they're trying to answer the question, who guards the guards? By, well, we'll all guard one another. Maybe we're all going to spy on one another. I don't know. It's very difficult to tell. And just one quick thing on Russia. If you want to laugh really hard, there's a European Union website called EU versus Disinfo, and it's all about Russia, and it's hilarious. They've got one here called "The Emperor Has No Clothes," and I don't want to shock you here, but a couple of things that they're claiming. They're saying that the Georgian disinformation space said that the West was in moral decay, and offered evidence that it was going to be a criminal offence in Canada to not use certain specified words to describe someone's gender, which is true. And Russian state TV said NATO was on a par with Daesh when it came to terrorism. I'm sure that shocks you greatly. So, yeah, it's a very funny website.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we'll just move on to Scotland's police, because we now know what they want taxi drivers to do. But what are they up to at the moment, David? The crisis, according to the Scotsman, worsens as Michael Matheson turns on force watchdog. Tell us who Michael Matheson is.
He's the responsible minister for justice in Scotland, and he is meant to be independent, and the Scottish Police Authority are meant to be independent for him. And the Scottish Police Authority decided to reinstate Phil Gormley as acting head of Police Scotland. He's going on gardening leave at the moment. And then Michael Matheson said, that's completely loopy, that's a terrible decision. I'm not happy with it. And then they had to rethink about it and realise it was a terrible decision and reversed it. So I do have a certain amount of sympathy for the minister here, because at this point there was 6, there's now 7 complaints against Phil Gormley by people he works with. And those complaints are all still being investigated because it's Scotland and we never complete an investigation into anything. And the proposal was to bring him back to work with these people in the same office, in command and control of the whole police force while these investigations went on, without even properly investigating the implications of this. It did seem a very poor decision from a very poor organisation. The Scottish Police Authority is plumbing the depths when it comes to organisational inefficiency. They were called the Kremlin a wee while ago for the secrecy, and they were called yesterday in Parliament, they were called a pantomime, which I think is slightly unfair on pantomimes.
But in the meantime, there is a temporary or an interim police chief who says that there's no crisis within Scotland's police. But unfortunately, he seems to be under investigation himself.
He is, and that's maybe not the whole of it either. There is no crisis. A couple of paragraphs of what he said here, just quickly, if I may. Deputy Chief Constable Ian Livingston, who is running Police Scotland in the absence of Chief Constable Phil Gormley, mounted a staunch defence of his officers, arguing that they have solved every murder in Scotland and kept the country running smoothly. Now, yes, they'll solve every murder in Scotland if they recategorise all the other ones as suicide. And I would direct people to the unanswered questions regarding Stephen Sutherland on our website on that one. And does the Deputy Chief Constable really think the police is the body that is keeping the country running smoothly? There's a name for that, and that's a police state. And he then goes on, quote, "There are issues within Police Scotland. There are issues around governance and accountability," he admitted. But he added there was no crisis in policing. He insisted that the actual policing work was unaffected by troubles at the top. So we have a man here who is in acting command of Police Scotland, so unable to grasp his role in that position that he thinks that policing on the ground doesn't get affected by the decisions and the turmoil and the chaos in the senior management of Police Scotland. That is, in organisational terms, buffoonery. It's inept. It's beyond stupid. And he's saying this in the national press. I'm just astounded.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on then. Tell us who is the Ecologia Youth Trust?
This is an organisation that is operating in many places all around the globe, it would seem, and it's part of a network of similar organisations. They wrote to many people in the Highlands to say, and by the way, in Scotland is where we run experiments on the population because we're compliant and nice. And the Highlands is where in Scotland we run experiments on the population because of the same reason. They wrote to parents offering work experience and a thing called Growing Together. Now, this is where you take, quote, teenagers from disadvantaged homes, how exactly these are defined, no one quite knows, and you give them a job in a nursery to mentor toddlers, and everyone benefits and it's all fine. So we started to have a little look, and many thanks to our wonderful researcher, Wildcat, who a lot of people know on the internet for all of this. We started to research this organisation, and we found a huge network of organisations. And the key person, the person who signed this letter, was Lady Diana Whitmore. Have you got anything on that coming up?
Do.
Yes,
yeah,
here we go. Lady Diana Whitmore. Now, she's in many organisations, right? She has got a background in this, which I think is not unfair to say, fringe psychology, or it's a fringe psychology movement, which has got some origins in the New Age movement. She's operating with the Findhorn Foundation in Northern Scotland, which is New Age as well. and she's part of a huge network of international organizations, very well funded international foundations, who are working to change children, to operating as change agents. And the next slide here shows one of them. This is called Children Are
Children Are Our Asset, I think it is, or
Children are our ultimate investment, it actually is.
That's the one.
Children are an investment.
So this is an organization based in America, but Diana Whitmore's operating this in the UK. And the founder of this was the wife of Aldous Huxley. And this woman who you see in the photograph here was a mentor to Diana Whitmore. So what you're seeing is international foundations, links to deep state players and people who have been involved in changing how people perceive humanity, are operating through this network, which takes them into schools, into our communities all around the country, to influence children, to influence how children think, to train them as leaders. Some of it, there's a group called the WISE Foundation. They read like Common Purpose for Teenagers. It's all about change agents. It's all the same language, and they want to get teenagers to make them the people who will engage in this leadership role in the future. It's a very interesting network, and I encourage people to go and look more into these organizations.
Especially parents, David, especially parents should be doing their research on these organizations, because you never know whether one of them is connected to your local school.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to fracking then, because there's been quite a development overnight. Now, many people that have been following the work of Ian R. Crane know the status of the development of the fracking industry in the UK over the last number of years. But last night, Greg Clark, who's the Secretary of State for Business, well, if you'd listened to Ian R. Crane's live streams on this over the last few weeks, he's making the point that Greg Clark has had a pretty serious decision to make about whether he was going to allow fracking to take place at Kirby Misperton, where there is currently all the equipment is sitting on the frack pad waiting to go, but he has to give his agreement. Well, last night he decided that he is not going to give his agreement until such times as the fracking companies involved, and this will apply to all the fracking sites in the country, provide their accounts, not only to make sure that they're in a liquid position in terms of their finances, but to make sure that should they be able to, should they frack on a particular site, that they actually have the financial resources available to clean up afterwards. So this is a major blow to the fracking industry. Now, Ian R. Crane produces a live video every morning at about 8:30. It's on Facebook, it's on YouTube. I do recommend people listen to it. So today, I'll just show a little excerpt from today's that'll give a bit more background to this.
Now, the reality is that he's not just going to look at the already 4-month late accounts of 2016, because obviously a lot has happened in that time. So even if the accounts for the period ending December 2016 stack up, which I somehow doubt they will, but nonetheless, they've been operating through 2017, getting into increasing amounts of debt. And more recently, they announced that they had to borrow another £7.5 million. Now, they haven't exactly disclosed what they needed that for, but the likelihood is that they've needed that to actually pay off the suppliers for the equipment that they've rented, which has been lying dormant on the pad at Kirby Misperton now for a total of, 79 days. So by the beginning of next week, we're into 80 plus days at a conservative estimate of £100,000 a day. So, you know, these costs just for having that kit sitting there are quite probably the wrong side of 8 million. So after Greg Clark's announcement yesterday saying that he would not sign off on the application at Kirby Misperton until he'd had the proper opportunity to review their accounts and get the Treasury to determine whether or not they had sufficient financial resources to cover potential liabilities up to and including decommissioning, which, let me short circuit the process for you, Greg, they don't.
They don't. This, I think, Brian, has to be seen as a major success for all the people campaigning on this issue, because the government has been forced to take this decision.
Absolutely, Mike. And I think this is, if we jump back to the beginning of the news, I think this is why George Soros and many of the other globalists are really very worried at the moment, because they can see the truth coming through alternative media. They can see people active on the ground and saying we're not having this nonsense. And of course the fracking community and Ian have done such a brilliant job to bring the facts about fracking in front of the wider public and politicians. And I think some of them are waking up, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, is this man, sorry, beg your pardon, is this man waking up? Let's show you Florence of Arabia, as he's known in Westminster. This is Rory Stewart, MP, up in the Lake District. And he suggested that people should pay another £5 on council tax to contribute towards flood defence. Would you be happy to pay more to be protected against flooding? Let us know your thoughts. An ITV Border has picked up on this. Let's just remember that, of course, we could find 800 billion, I think that was right, for quantitative easing, Mike. I'm sure you'll correct me. No money for flood defences. And last year or the year before, when bridges were destroyed in flooding, Rory Stewart couldn't even get himself to the right side of the river because the bridge wasn't there. So he was on one side, whereas all the locals were on the other side waiting for him to arrive. This is the standard of our MPs. But isn't it brilliant? We have banks creating money from nothing, but when it comes to flood defence, you've got to put your hand in your pocket and pay out more on the council tax. Same thing's going on with the NHS, and this was an email that came in this morning, and I'm going to say well done to the person who sent it, because they're picking up on what's going on with the NHS. Here they've done some analysis after a programme which was talking about the NHS. If you freeze the screen, you can read all of this. But the meat of it is that at least 6 billion being wasted on private sector consultants. This is the NHS being taken apart. But the person here saying if we can get more information out, and there's a 400-page document, if our viewers and listeners can get into this and research it, then we will be helping the NHS. So that's good. And David, this one is for you. It's a lady. Lisa Hollinghead from Findhorn Foundation. She's also been involved in the Ecologia Trust, but I noticed that she's been supporting, to my horror, a village in Russia. So there was only one thing I think we can leave our audience with today, and that is to say, run, hide, tell, the Russians are coming, and enjoy your weekend. David, will you be taking special protective measures because the Russians are coming? Some of the people in the chat box have noticed that you're building some form of shelter in your room there. I don't know whether that is an internal nuclear bunker.
It is not. It's to contain the puppy. So
is that a Russian puppy?
It's not a Russian puppy. Actually, it's a Labrador. Not really Russian at all. The Russians have not managed to hack my Labrador. As they're only coming by Twitter, I don't think I need to run and hide. I would say, though, that if I was the Russians, I would be quite concerned with this, because before the shooting wars start, there does tend to be a war of lies and intrigue, whether it's the Gulf of Tonkin or whether it's Hitler describing Polish aggression. There is lies that come first, and I'm sure the Russians are well aware of this.
David, a very astute statement, and I think we'll end by saying, of course, we take the subject of the defence of this country very seriously, but we have to say that at the moment the real danger is inside UK. This nation is being attacked by its own government, and that is the first danger. But yes, this could lead to much more serious things. In the meantime, we're allowed to deal with our own government with humour. They certainly don't like being laughed at. So there we are. Think about it, make your own precautions, but apparently the Russians are coming. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.